I recently sat down with Guyanese writer and artist Cosmata Lindie to discuss her journey from a home-schooled Berbice River Girl to an emerging dynamic creative in New Amsterdam, Guyana. A creative with captivating art exhibits in neighboring Suriname and riveting short stories on reputable digital publications like adastories.org and doiclitmag.com. Here is part one of our conversation. I got words. Hello, world. Welcome to a special episode of Pablo Speaks, the podcast where words influence thoughts, influence actions. I'm your host, James Paul Sr., also known as Jamie Pablo, and today's podcast is special because I have a special guest joining me today. All the way from New Amsterdam, Berbice, Guyana, she's none other than the super talented Guyanese writer and artist, Cosmata Lindie. Sister Cosmata, welcome to Pablo Speaks. How are you doing today?
I am very well today, and I'm
Awesome.
looking forward to this conversation.
All right, so Cosmata Lindie is an indigenous Guyanese artist and writer from the upper Berbice River, currently residing in the town of New Amsterdam, my hometown, in the county of Berbice. She began participating in art exhibitions at the national level in Guyana in 2022, including the POSH, POSH, and Heritage Month exhibitions at the National Gallery of Art / Castellani House. In March 2023, she exhibited her work in Paramaribo. Well, congratulations. Suriname,
Thank
as
you.
part, yeah, you're welcome, as part of the joint Guyana Suriname Art Splash exhibition to mark the launching of the third edition of the binational magazine titled Inside Guyaname. Is that correct?
Guyana.
And she was longlisted in 2022 for the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival's Elizabeth Nunes Award for writers residing in the Caribbean, and she was shortlisted for the 2023 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. She has been published in, is that ADA?
Yes.
ADDA?
Yes,
And
Ada.
that piece we're going to talk about today is titled Where the Winds Blow, a fascinating piece. And that was in July of last year, and also published in DOIC. This is a Namibia-based magazine, correct?
Yes,
In
yes, that is
Namibia.
correct.
And that story is titled The Deer's Tale, which is also fascinating. She's also an avid gardener and reader. So in our conversation today, Cosmat, I would like to capture your personal and professional journey from a Berbice River Girl, as we say in Creole, to an artist, writer, and storyteller, with exhibits A and B being those two aforementioned short stories. I got words. Good, well, let's kick off with a softball question. Who is Cosmata Lindie?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So I'll be honest with you here, Jamie.
Okay.
It's a softball question, but it's the kind of question that usually leaves me at a bit of a loss for words.
Okay.
This is because I think how does one, as in my say from my point of view, how does one condense almost half a century of living into a few short sentences? As we mentioned before, I am a native of the Berbice River.
Right.
I am a transplanted New Amsterdamer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Welcome.
I work a day job, a regular day job, like so many others. And I would say that my job title is clerk, but that is just what I do. That is not who I am.
Gotcha.
That is my job. I'm a person that lives, or I say spends a great deal of time in many, many worlds. within my own mind. And I occasionally try to give form to those words, to those worlds by through writing or in color,
Okay.
paint on canvas.
Gotcha.
So that is who I am.
Gotcha.
I'm a
Right.
creative.
I got words. And I can tell from the characters that you have in, especially in the Deer's Tale, that you have a close connection to nature and you
Yes.
understand animals and their lives and their personalities and so on. And
Yes.
so give us a sense as to what life was like for you as a child growing up.
Well, growing up in the river, I would say what would have been dominant in my life would have been the jungle, the water. That is what that was my world as a child growing up. There were a lot of adventures. There were a lot of scrapes and near misses.
Right.
And because growing up there, you become accustomed to things like jaguars, anacondas, and things that most people would find, say strange,
Terrifying.
was sort of terrifying, was sort of
Yes.
everyday life for me.
Gotcha. Okay.
So my childhood was filled with adventure. It was filled with so many memories that I could draw back on now when I am being creative, when I'm writing my stories, especially I would
Yes.
say the animals,
Yep.
that those were a big part of my life growing up too. So that's why it was sort of easy for me to draw on those things, and why I think I did mention in Deer's Tale, I drew heavily on childhood memories to write that particular story.
Yes, that's amazing. I got words. Give us an example of a terrifying experience.
This one concerns a jaguar, in fact.
Whoa.
When I was a child, I can't remember exactly around what time, but we had a lot of dogs. The dogs were always there in the yard.
Okay.
And since we lived, well, I would say, so close to the jungle, it means that we always had jaguars coming around the area, because when you have animals, of course, they see it as prey.
Right.
There was one incident I remembered. I had this puppy called Smokey, and he had a brother called Bandit, which my younger brother took as his puppy.
Okay.
So one night, we heard the dogs barking like crazy. And you understand that when a jaguar or any of the big cats come around, the dogs have a different way of barking.
Oh,
it's not
really?
a normal way that they would bark, say, when somebody comes around. It's sort of panic you hear in there in the bark. So as soon as you hear that kind of bark, you know immediately, one of the big cats are in the yard.
Yes.
So my father I remember it was a bright moonlight night. My father jumped up immediately, ran out down to the waterside, and saw the most terrifying sight. There was my little puppy running for his life along the waterside, and right behind him was this enormous jaguar. My dad, he didn't stop to think. He ran down the bank and he waved his hands and he shouted, "Stop!" And the jaguar stopped. Did he have a gun with him? He had not. He did not have his gun. He didn't stop to get his gun. He ran down just like that. So the jaguar stopped, and it gave the dog a chance to turn and run up the bank and get away. Well, my mother had, of course, gotten up same time, and she picked up the gun, put in the cartridge, and brought it to him because he was shouting, "Agnes, bring the gun." Yeah. And she ran with the gun, and I'm talking about maybe about 20 feet from where our kitchen was. Right. This jaguar came in, and my dad now ran back up the bank and waited at the top of the bank. Comes the jaguar, and he shot it right there on the lime tree that we had at the corner. My God. So you were, as children, were up watching. We were up. We were up. We were up after all the confusion. Yes. And it was an enormous jaguar, because it rolled down the bank and we left it there. The sad part is it had killed the other dog. Oh. It killed. That's Bandit. Yeah, my brother's Bandit. Yes. Bandit. Oh, man. He saved my dog. My puppy was saved, but my brother's was killed. Dog was killed. Yes. Oh, man. I got words. Let's talk about your parents. You mentioned them. Let's give them a shout out. Who's your dad? Who's your mom? And your siblings? Let's talk about them. Okay. Well, my dad is he's a Lindie originally from Deville. My
Okay.
mother was her maiden name is Agard. Her family's from Kimbia. But
Okay.
after they got married, they moved farther up the river.
Okay. Gotcha. And then you have siblings as well, right? So who are your
I have two
siblings?
brothers,
Two
yes.
brothers. Okay. What are their
Two brothers.
names?
Shane and Francis.
I got words. Since you lived up the river, I'm assuming, was there a school there for you to attend, or did you have to go to Kokwani to go to school?
Well, I think this is the part that might surprise the listeners most of all. I
Yeah.
was homeschooled
Okay. For how many years?
most of my life,
Most of your life. So
yes,
what are we talking up until what age?
until I came to New Amsterdam.
Which is, how old were you when you came to New
I
Amsterdam?
was 21,
21.
yes.
You were homeschooled throughout what would be in primary school and high
My
school.
formative years, yes.
Exactly. So, so now you're in New Amsterdam. Take us back to that time. How did you feel having not been to a formal school? Did that set you back in any way? How, or were you confident?
I was pretty confident, because when I left the river, I came out with a plan.
Okay.
I was determined. I remember I told my mother that, it was time I left home,
Okay.
that there wasn't anything else for me there. And in order for me to, become who I wanted to be at the time, I needed to come out.
Yes.
But I didn't know New Amsterdam.
Okay.
So we made a trip down because she had relatives here.
Okay.
And there was one who was her god sister, Norma Boyle. She was Boyle, but she was originally Boyle, but she had married King, so she was
Okay.
Norma King. And we came down, and my mom spoke to her and asked her. She said, my daughter wants to come out, and we need a place for her to stay. And Auntie Norma, right away, she said yes. I'd
Nice.
never met her before,
Okay.
but she provided me with a place to stay. And I
Yes.
came down, and my plan was to go to commercial school, get a sort of a formal education,
Right.
get a job, and see where things went from there. And that's
Okay.
what I did.
That's what you did. Yeah. So
That's what
did
I
you
did.
go to Maggie Clark?
No, I went to Miss Bennon's.
Oh, it's Bennett. Yeah.
Miss Bennon's,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. But that was a very common route for a lot of young ladies. My sisters
Yes.
as well. They went to Maggie Clark, and there was I lived in Tugbo Park, and there was Miss Lancaster who was up on
Okay.
the back street. She had a typing class, typing school there. So I remember my sister would have her typewriter, and I remember
Yes.
practicing was ASDF semicolon LKJ,
Tell me
right?
about it. I did that. Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
I got words. So now you're 21, you're in New Amsterdam, and you're getting on with your life.
I'm getting
Um,
on. It was hard. The first year was very hard. It was
yeah,
it was a very sudden transition.
right.
And there were times when, I felt so homesick. I was,
I
thinking, give this up and go back home. But I didn't. I
You
didn't.
didn't.
Because what was the point?
Yeah,
I'd already made up my mind that
mine.
this is what I wanted to do. So it was just a matter of getting
Right.
past that
Yeah.
homesickness until I got to the point where I didn't miss home quite so much anymore.
So what helped you get through that? Was there any particular thing or just a combination of things?
Well, it was the determination is one thing. I've always been
Okay.
this kind of very determined person. And my older brother was in New Amsterdam because he had moved a few years before I came. He was in
Okay.
New Amsterdam. So I
Good.
did have him, though he did not live in the same place that I did. He
Okay.
was staying with another relative in another part of New Amsterdam.
Yeah. That highlights the importance of relatives and family
Yes,
in supporting the education of their younger relatives. I think that's a
yes,
big part of our tradition.
it is. It is.
Absolutely. And I think there's
It
a
is.
story that needs to be told about that. What do you think?
I'll think about it.
There you go. I got words. What was your first job there in New Amsterdam? Do you remember?
I worked as a hotel receptionist, and that job only lasted 2 days.
2 days.
And I walked off, yes.
Oh, okay.
And I
So you
left the
weren't
job
happy.
I was not happy.
So is there
And
a
then
story you want to tell? Is there a story there that needs to be told?
no, it wasn't
It
me. It
wasn't for
just
you.
did, no, it was not for
Okay.
me. It was not
Gotcha.
for me.
Gotcha.
It was not for me.
And what was next?
Well, next I got called back, and
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly by the same person who owned the hotel that I had walked off his job. And he
Okay.
said there was a opening for a clerk at the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And I applied for that and I got through. And that was a job that I pretty much stayed with all the time. I grew
Okay.
from there. So he and I actually became very good friends, even though I did walk off his job.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But
Yes.
that's good. I mean, so you stood your ground, and I guess there's a lesson there in life, that you've got to
Suppose,
sometimes trust
yes.
your instinct, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
I got words. Do you remember the first time you actually started writing or painting?
I started painting before drawing, in fact. The
Drawing.
writing came much later. The
Okay.
writing actually came after I came to New Amsterdam. But the drawing, the art was always there.
Yes. Okay.
I think as long as I can remember myself, I had always been drawing.
Yes.
And one good thing I must say is that my parents always ensured that I had art supplies that were available.
I got words.
I did this, I can't remember the year. This might have been 2012,
Okay.
maybe. I am not certain. This was done a long time back. This was inspired by the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner,
Okay.
which is one of my favorite
Favorite
poems.
poems? Mine too. Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's quite a
yeah.
poem, isn't it?
It's quite a poem, quite a story, a
Yeah.
narrative poem.
Yes, it
And
is.
it's
And I just like the imagery of this ghost ship coming on this silent sea. And then the sailors are thinking that maybe help is coming, but when they look, they see
yeah.
this woman, which sailors think that seeing a woman while at sea is really bad luck, right?
Okay.
So this ship has a woman and the other passenger is dead. And this
Ah,
is what the woman and death are dicing for the soul of
that's
the
that's
mariner
death
who
in the
is narrating.
background. Yes.
Yes, who is narrating that. But well, of course, I did my own thing with it. I didn't
Yeah.
exactly show the dicing and all of that. This
Okay.
was just
Your
my own
interpretation
image.
of it.
Yes.
Yeah. As I read your stories and as I read your posts and I listen to you, I understand you've got a rich imagination, right? And that's a big part of writing.
Yes,
It comes out
extremely.
in both of those short stories. I got words. I'm sure that you read a lot of books when you were up the Berbice River, right? Before
Yes.
you came down.
Many, many, many
Right.
books. Hundreds of books. Our
Yes.
house was filled with books. Because
Absolutely.
one of the things, being as I said, I was homeschooled, one of
Yes.
the things that not only my parents, but my relatives overseas and out always made sure that we had a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
So I was educated in a great part through reading,
Mm-hmm.
and I read everything. Everything you could think
Gotcha.
about, I read it.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite books or authors that you remember? Like,
Well, from childhood, I would remember the Grimm fairy tales.
okay.
Hans Christian Andersen's style of writing always had an impact on me. There is
Okay.
something about his way of writing that always sort of resonated with me. I remember reading some of the old legends, the Reader's Digest. It's hard to really say
Yeah.
which one because there were so many.
There's so many. Yeah.
So many.
Absolutely.
I was a kind of person, I started reading from very young, maybe from about 5 or 6, I was reading very fluently.
Okay.
And I read everything. As long as it had a page with words on it, I read it.
You read it. Awesome.
I read
Yes,
it.
that well that helps because the more you read, the better you write. What are you reading now?
I am reading a book for a book club, the Guyana book club that I belong to. It's
Okay.
called The Shadow King,
Okay.
and
The Shadow
it's
King.
based on the war in Ethiopia. I'm about
Mm-hmm.
halfway through it. It's an
Okay.
interesting story.
Nice. The Shadow King. Check that out. I got words. Let's shift to writing a bit, right?
Yes.
What qualities in your mind makes a great writer in terms of a storytelling, a short story writer, as opposed to a novelist?
You have to make your characters interesting. I think
Okay.
that is foremost. Once the reader must in some way be able to connect with the character. For me, I always call myself an emotional writer in the sense that my stories are often driven by the emotions
Yes.
of the characters.
Okay.
I am not certain that plot is absolutely necessary, that it has to have a very strong plot, but I think if the
Yes.
characters are interesting enough,
Right.
you can get away with a plot that is not that strong, as long as the reader can, become invested
Right.
in the characters. Yes.
All right. Well, speaking of characters, I want to talk about The Deer's Tale, the first short story we're going to reference today as our Exhibit A. So, The Deer's Tale, this is a screenshot from the website, which is doeklitmag.com, where the story can be found. So, I encourage all the viewers to go there and take a read. It is a fascinating story. So let's talk about the inspiration for writing this short story and the elements that you use in terms of building characters and the process from idea to writing to then editing and then sharing it on these platforms.
Yes. This particular story went through a number of changes. How it actually came into being is very interesting. I must thank my mother for that.
Okay.
She actually, I would say, started the story. I think this would have been several years ago. I'm really not good at remembering the years, but this would
Okay.
have been quite a long time ago. She came to New Amsterdam and she showed me an exercise book. She said, I started to write a short story here, but I'm not a writer. I want you to write a story. She had named the deer Bayo. She had
Mm,
named him.
okay.
But the idea she had was more of a fairy tale thing.
Gotcha.
So I took the story. I really liked what she had done because in her version there was this little deer living with his grandpa and grandma deer. And that was what her story was, more, as I said, more like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And I sort of followed that in the first version of this story.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
I liked it then. And I remember I sent it in to the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. It was rejected, but I still like the story, so I still held
Yes.
on to it.
Yeah.
And then in 2020, I took part in a short story workshop, 2 days at Tain
Mm-hmm.
Campus. It
Yeah.
was funded by the Commonwealth Foundation,
Right.
and I was one of the participants who took part in this workshop. When we finished, we got an email from the Commonwealth Foundation saying that all those persons who took part in the workshop are eligible to take part in a mentoring program where they would be
Nice.
mentored by an established writer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a 6 week program. We had to provide a short story and some of the work that we did at the workshop. And I did the whole thing because I said, this is a great opportunity.
Yes.
And I took it and I was accepted. And I was paired with the Barbadian speculative fiction writer, Dr. Karen Lord.
Nice.
I remember that was a life-changing experience for me.
Wow.
In that 6 weeks of mentoring by Dr. Lord, I learned so many things about writing, especially short story writing, that I did not know before.
I got words.
I did not understand character
What
agency
is
in a
character
story.
agency?
Character agency is what the character does to move the story forward.
Mm,
And this is a very important thing in writing. Your characters,
okay.
if they are too, if they do nothing and the story happens without them, they have no agency.
Ah,
They must in some way do something to move that story from point A to
right.
point B.
Yeah, that's
The
great.
other thing I learned too was the importance of a backstory.
Mm,
A backstory is not necessarily told in the story, but it must be implied so that the reader can know from reading what the character's backstory is. So
got
those are
you.
two very important
Very
things I
important
learned.
things. Okay.
Yes, very
That's good to
important
know.
things I
Thanks.
learned.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
So our
Yes.
listeners are now educated.
Well, I
Absolutely.
was certainly educated. So I
Yes.
remember what happened with the deer's tail. As I said, I still love this story, rejection
Yes.
or not.
It's a
So
great
it was
story.
a story that I worked on because what we had to do as part of the mentoring, we I had to work on a particular story. In which case, she would look at it. She would not advise, and this is the thing I really admired about Karen. She does not tell you what to write.
Okay.
She asks you questions about the story. And surprisingly, when you answer those questions, you understand what you have to do.
Mm,
With The Deer's Tale, she read it through and she asked me a number of questions about the story, including what genre is this story? What is it you want to, these characters to say? And I realized that when I answered those questions, I didn't really know the answer. So that made me
yes.
realize that the story had a lot of weaknesses. So I
Yes.
had two choices to me, that I could either work on those parts or I could rewrite the entire story.
Right.
And I ended up, as I said, I performed surgery in that story. I cut out everything. I kept the
Yes.
characters, I cut
Mm-hmm.
out the entire story, and I rewrote the entire
Entire
story,
thing.
the
Wow.
entire thing. In that
Nice.
6 weeks, I did the entire thing over, and I finished it. And I remember when I showed it to her, the end that was at the end of the program, because as I said, she didn't advise me what to do.
Right.
She just said, work on the story, and then at the end, you'll show it to me. And at the end, she said, Cosmata, I really love what you've done here. This story has a lot of potential. It's the kind of story I would like to see in Caribbean schools because you've written about something that most people don't know about, which is
Right.
the jungle written from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, I get the story. I continued editing it because it was very raw then,
Yes.
and I cut it down to the current version that you read
Yes.
that was published. Yes.
Now,
So
do you have an excerpt handy that you can read or
yes,
yeah.
I do.
Okay, good.
I would
So
not come to something like this without an excerpt
of
ready.
course, of course. So
Yes.
while you're doing that, I want to say that as I read The Deer Still, that was the first time I read it. And I said, I've got to get Cosmata on my podcast because it's unlike anything I've ever read, especially coming from the Caribbean, because it clearly shows your understanding of animal life and your passion, your empathy for the animals, which many humans lack, sadly. I got words.
So I think whoever have registered would know which this part is. This is after Teddy has been shot and Bayou runs to meet him.
Yeah.
So Teddy took a shuddering breath. I've already gone over all the shoulds and should not haves until none are left. But there's no point in spending my last remaining moments wallowing in regret day. I've concluded that I've had a magnificent run of this thing called life. And I've been lucky enough to have made the best friend a soul could ever ask for. Bayou wasn't ready to give up. I'll take care of you, he said. Stay right here. But Teddy cut him off. It's no use, Bay. I've already been here long enough to feel my life dripping drop by slow drop into the ground. See the world become duller by the hour, and know that every next breath will be a little harder to draw than the last. Bayou said nothing, and Teddy continued. You better split now, bro. I've sent for my keeper, and you don't want to be here when he comes. You sent for my keeper? Bayou wondered if he'd heard right. Shocking, I know. Been avoiding him all my life, right? But he's the only one who can help me now. I could be like this for a while longer, and I'd rather not, you know? Leave now before. But it was already too late to leave. A sudden faint snarl coming from the edge of the hollow froze them. Bayou felt his heart leapfrog into his throat and then fall like a stone into the pit of his stomach, for the wind had subtly shifted toward him at that moment, bringing with it a musky, pungent odor that was unmistakable. Two fierce eyes gleamed over the rim of the hollow in the gathering dimness. Then a massive head came into view. In the gloom, Makepa seemed to flow like a tongue of gold and black fire down the side of the hollow, muscles and sinews rippling under his gleaming coat, his cold yellow eyes taking in the scene without flickering. So, he said, here we are at last. Imagine that. After everything that's happened, it's me you turn to for mercy now. But still on my terms, said Teddy stubbornly. I've made my peace, Makepa. You'll finally get what you want. All I ask is to make it quick, please. Bayou took a small step back, trying as quietly as possible to put some distance between himself and the jaguar. But Makepa swung his head around, pinning him down with his eyes. You have nothing to fear from me now, he sneered. I know what you all think of me, and you're right, but it's my job. This is what I do, and I do it well. I keep this jungle healthy, Bayou. I ensure that only the strongest survive here. And yes, I do enjoy what I do. Now go, my timid little friend, before I change my mind. Bayou knew the jaguar meant what he said, but he stood his ground this time. Ignoring Makepa, he leaned forward, touching his face to Teddy's. You have been the best friend I ever had, Teddy, and I am grateful for the season of friendship that we shared, he said quietly. May your spirit cross the river safely to the other side. It was good knowing you, my brother, Teddy said, and I'm ready. Take good care of yourself, eh? The night is coming, growled Makepa. Bayou looked up, and for a moment they stared at each other. Go, now, said the jaguar, turning away. Bayou turned and fled out of the hollows.
Wow. I got words.
What I wanted to show in this particular part is the what we call like the circle of life. How important, is for instance, Makepa is this. I envision him in a way as a sort of a god figure.
Okay.
He decides who lives and dies, of course. In the jungle, he's the most powerful. He's the apex predator.
Right.
But at the same time, in comparing him to the human character, the human actually has a higher standing, if you want to say, than
Okay.
even Makepa, because he can
Right.
destroy Makepa, the same way how Makepa can destroy any of the other animals. But at the
Right.
same time, Makepa, even though he's a predator, he has a purpose. He is there for a reason.
Yes.
In all, you might say his cruelty, his what. At the same time, like he points out to Bayou, this is my job. This is what I do.
Right.
Teddy, in a way, also, um, in his own way, he had spent all his time running from Makepa. He had this old feud going on with Makepa for a very long time. But at the same time, at the end of it, it's Makepa who he turns to take him out of his suffering.
Yes.
Makepa is the only one who could do it.
I got words.
I would like them to get an understanding of the connections or the connection of life, and not only with the animals, but with the humans, between the animals, with jungle and everything, because there was a part I even wrote about the logging and so intruding. I know these things are sort of necessary, but at the same time, we need to understand that indiscriminate use of resources is not the way to go. The idea was to present these characters in a way that the reader can relate to them and sort of put themselves in the place of them. So it's, let's say now you realize that if this story was told from the animal's point of view, what it would be like for them. And I would also like to make this point, Jamie, is that the human hunter is not portrayed as evil. If you don't mind, I would like to read a little excerpt from about him. Yes. This is what I think I tried to convey in this story too, that in the jungle, it's always about survival. There's always this thing, and even the humans who live there are part of that survival of the fittest.
Yes.
Thing. So let me just read this here, because also remember, and this is what I would also like to mention, is that this hunter was actually based on memories of my own father, who was a hunter. Yeah. So that makes it in a way, it's like me writing about the animals from a very sympathetic point of view and also being the child of a hunter.
Who hunted not for pleasure, but because he
No,
needed food, right? It was a
he needed
necessity.
food.
Right,
For
exactly.
exactly,
Yeah.
right.
I got words.
So let me just read here. Miles away, in a quiet, dimly lit house beside a river, the hunter was preparing for the night. He was a man of the bush, lean in body and gaunt of face. Weathered by a lifetime of exposure to the elements, there was no softness in any of his lines. His dark eyes were sharp and piercing, gazing out from his face like a hawk. He made his living off the land, dependent on the harsh and often unpredictable nature of the environment in which he lived, where the laws of the jungle applied to all and survival of the fittest did not exclude humans. He was as much a farmer as he was a hunter, but the dry season had made farming difficult this year. He relied heavily on hunting income to provide for his family. Rations were running low, as he'd seen from the dinner his wife had prepared earlier that evening. As he passed the open doorway of his children's room, he paused for a moment to look in on them as they slept. The warm light from an oil lamp on the wall glowed on two peaceful, sleeping faces. The hard lines of the father's face softened a little in the lamplight before he turned away. The last few nights had not been productive, but staying at home was not an option. This night was much brighter than he preferred. He also knew that deer sometimes walk with the moon. He carefully checked his 12-gauge shotgun and ran an oil wrap through the barrel to remove residue. He counted and graded the cartridges in the belt around his waist, filling up some empty spaces from a box of Remington shells he took from a shelf high above the door. Earlier, he had fetched a 12-volt battery and spotlight into his boat and fueled his 6 horsepower Yamaha outboard motor. He checked that his paddle, sharp hunting knife, cutlass, and a flask of hot black coffee were stored away. Dressing warmly for the night, he took the torchlight into his jacket pocket, got into his boat, started the engine, and puttered away up the river, the beam of his hunting light leaping from one side of the river to the other as he passed.
Wow, that's storytelling, folks, narrated by a dynamic storyteller herself. Thanks for listening to part one of my conversation with Cosmata Lindie, Guyanese writer and artist based in New Amsterdam, Guyana. Please join me next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for part two and the conclusion of our conversation, in which we discuss the themes, characters, storylines, and premise of her second short story titled Where the Winds Blow, which also showcases her vivid imagination and skill as a writer and storyteller. See you then. Have a safe, productive, and peaceful week. Ayo!
I got words. I got words. I got words. I got words in my head. Every word I've read. I got words in the oven, baking like bread. I got words.